What is up, you guys? I hope you're doing well. I'm Tony Fuentes, and today we're returning to the Edit Like series. So in this case, the profile that we're analyzing is Drtzed. I don't know how to pronounce it. Here it is. Maybe you can tell me down below. I'm going to call him Derek because that's his name. So his profile is heavily resembling the 70s and the 80s vibe with a very retro style. And it kind of looks like if it was shot with a film look style, but it isn't, guys. He uses an A7 III with a 24-70 G master, so everything is down to the editing. So his style is very unique. It's taking obviously portraits in a very harsh sunlight and with this retro vibe. So let's go down to analyze it. Then we're going to create a preset and see how it applies on different scenarios, guys. So just a little disclaimer, guys, I'm not taking any authority on his style. This is just my interpretation on his color grading. And the purpose of this video is taking you through the process, guys. How to achieve a unique look by looking into what each slider does. And we're using his profile as well as many others to use as an example on how to achieve a unique look, guys. So let's go down to his style. Okay, so the first thing that we can notice is that all his models or his talents are females. There's no men in his portraits. So let's click on this one. And another thing that we can notice, a very important thing to notice in his style, is that everything is shot at day, even at midday like this one, but the shadows are barely noticeable, guys. Everything is lifted in the shadows and in the blacks. That's done in the basic correction and in the tone curve. Now, another thing to notice in this portrait is the tones or the colors of the blues. Now, this is California, guys. We all know that sea in California isn't like the Caribbean. It's not this color. This is done in the HSL tabs, taking them towards the aquas and also lifting them with the luminance tab. So we keep scrolling down. His portraits are very fantastic. Again, this portraits or these series of portraits are very unique. We can see that everything is very flat. We don't see a blown out sky, overexposed. We don't see underexposed shadows. Everything is very flat. Like most of the profiles that we've analyzed, they tend towards this black, correctly exposed image, guys. Again, the greens and all the colors are a bit alterated. We can do that in the HSL further along. And another thing to notice in this portrait in particular is the film grain. We can see that the size is quite big, the roughness is very big, and the quantity, guys. So it's very prominent, heavily resembling the analog style. Now, if we keep scrolling along, we can see that the sky is heavily resembling the aqua tone. So that's a hint in which way we have to alter the blues. This one is shot at golden hour at the sunset. So the sun obviously is in this direction and the sun is coming in this way. So everything in this side of the model should be very contrasty or very dark. It's not the case, guys. Remember, the shadows are very lifted, so we get a lot of information in this side of the face and the model in general. So that's done again in the RGB tone curve and the HSL. Another thing that's very important, guys, in portraits in general, not just replicating Drtzed's style, is what the model is wearing. So in this case, we can see that this model is heavily resembling, with the clothing of the model heavily resembling the 70s and the 80s. I remember seeing portraits of my cousins and my sisters way back in time. They're 20 years older than me, using these type of clothing in the 80s. So basically that's the style that we want to replicate, guys. So always talk to the model or the talent. Maybe he or she has some ideas on what clothing is important or appropriate for the situation. Maybe they feel more comfortable with that type of clothing, and the props is very important, guys. So the clothing in this image basically adds to the dramatism and to the effect that we want to achieve. We can see that that's not always the case, guys. In this case, this portrait is shot with some contemporary or modern day clothing, nothing too special, but the lighting is quite similar, guys. So if we keep scrolling down, we can see that the style is very constant. Everything is very consistent. And here we can see another portrait where we can see the shadows are very lifted. Everything should be very hard contrasty because it looks like it is midday, guys. So everything is very light and pastel-like color. That's the thing we want to achieve in the HSL tabs, in the luminance in particular, and also by reducing the clarity and the dehaze, guys. If we click on this one, we can see that the blacks are very raised. There's no detail or apparent detail in the shadows. Everything is very raised and there's a lot of loss of information down here. Still, he achieves his flat style, very unique, very beautiful portraits of Michelle in this case. And if we keep scrolling down, there are some exceptions like this one where he's using a flash. Here we can see the shadow of a flash in the wall of the garage, and as well in the face of the model, which is very brightened up. So we lose some information, but we get this gloomy effect, guys. Now you can do this on field with a flash, also with a filter, diffusing filter or gloom filter, or we can mimic the style by adding some haze on the image on Lightroom and less clarity to get this bloom effect, guys. So basically that's his style. It's very consistent throughout his profile. So let's jump into Lightroom and edit this, guys. So guys, once in Lightroom, we have all these images. Basically, all of them are on a sunny day. Some are in the shadows, some are with more contrast, some are in the midday with the sun beaming down on the subject, and others, in this case, this one, is shot in an afternoon with the sun almost gone, guys. So basically, these are the conditions that Drtzed normally shoots his portraits. So let's go and edit this, guys. Now, to have a comparison with what Drtzed uses, I've selected this photograph from him, which has a lot of greens, just like these ones. So we have the same amount of greens, and those are the things that we want to compare: the greens, the shadows, the highlights, how everything is on this image. We can see that this image is very creamy, it has a lot of pastel like colors, and it's very flat, guys. That's the first thing that we're gonna do. So we head over to the develop tab, and the first thing I'm gonna do is make this image a lot more flat. Now I'm gonna make a preset, guys, and then see how it applies on all of the photographs. Don't worry, we're not gonna edit all of them. So remember to create a preset, or how I create a preset, basically I don't touch the white balancing, exposure and contrast. That will depend on each image, basically because every image is shot in different lighting conditions, and everything is quite different in every shot. So let's start off by making the image a lot more flat, and for that I'm going to go with a -70 on the highlights. So remember that you can move the slider to adjust it. You can also put the number over here, type it down manually, or you can put the mouse over the name over here, and with minus or plus on your keyboard you can move the values by up or down by 5%. So in this case we're going to go with a +100 on the shadows to make them a lot more bright. Then the whites are going to go down with a -24. Meanwhile, the blacks, we want them to be raised a bit. We don't want too much contrast, so that's going to go up to a +19. Just like that, guys. Next up, in the presence, the clarity and texture, well, normally we're tempted to ump them up to make the image a lot more contrasty and a lot more dramatic, just like this. But as we can see in sunny days, it starts looking rather odd, like an HDR image. It doesn't look very good at all, guys. So we're going to go with a -22 on the clarity and a -20 on the texture. And as we can see immediately, the image is a lot more flat and it's looking less sharp, but that's part of the style that Drtzed has, guys. Next up, the haze. Well, basically the name says it, it removes all the haze of the image or any mist. So if you amp it up, you can see that it's a lot more contrasty. But in this case, we're going to go down to a -20, guys. Now in -20, watch what happens. The image is a lot more bloomy, and there's this glowing effect around the skin tones of the model. That's basically a great effect to have, guys, for portraits. Next up, I'm going to skip vibrance and saturation, basically because in the HSL tabs, we're going to move them manually. Now remember that the tone curve is basically these points over here. We have the blacks down here, we have the whites over here, midtones, and then here are the highlights and the blacks and the shadows in the middle, guys. So we're going to select the shadows just like this, and the midtones, and then we're just going to pull down the midtones ever so slightly, and then pull up the shadows to make those blacks fade out and have them faded away, just like in the example that we have, guys. Here we can see that the black, she's wearing black top and black shoes, and everything is completely faded out. There's no pure blacks in this image, guys. So basically that's what we're gonna do. Maybe pull down a bit the shadows just like this. You can copy this shape or screenshot it, guys, if you want. And next up in the HSLs, now over here in the HSL tabs we have hue, and basically hue, what it does is changing the tone of certain color towards another one. So here we have the red in this jacket over here. If we move it to the other side, it tends towards the oranges, and to the other side towards the magentas. But in this case, we're not going to move this one, and I'm going to explain that basically because every shoot that Drtzed has, her models are dressed differently. They basically have all types of colors in his photo shoots. And if we look over here, we have this image with her model in oranges, and over here we have a brick wall in the back that's between the reds and the oranges, and it's basically altered. So there's no point in altering the color if for the next shoot you're gonna need that color to be in another place, guys. So basically here we have another instance where the oranges are completely off, or the reds are completely off towards the oranges. So basically the hue, we're not going to move it at all, guys, but we are going to move the saturation and the luminance. Now luminance, what we're going to do is basically desaturate everything. So we're going to go with a -7 on the reds, and then all of them all the way up to the blues, we're going to go with a -15 for the blues, -15 for the purples and for the magentas, and all the others between them and the reds are going to go with a -12. Now basically that desaturated all of the image, but in certain manner that the reds aren't so affected, guys, because in most of these images the reds are very constant. Now here in the luminance, what we're going to do is amp up everything. That's something I normally don't do except in portrait. So let's amp up to a +20 the reds, to a +25 the oranges, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and put all these values, guys. You can screenshot them afterwards. And basically these are the values that I'm gonna use, guys. Now if we click this button on and off, we can see what we've done, and we can see that everything basically is a lot more shiny, guys. The colors are popping a lot more, and that's looking very nice on our portrait, guys. Now in split toning, in this case, we're not going to add anything. Normally, Drtzed doesn't add anything in the shadows. We can see if we jump up to the comparison view that the blacks are basically just faded out. There's no blue tone to it. There's no purple or oranges. Just going to leave it like that. But maybe in the highlights, we are going to add a bit of orange tones, just like this one, and amp up the exposure just a little bit. So when the sun hits the model, it looks like if it's a very orangey-like sun from a sunset. Next up, all the way down to effects, the film grain is very important, guys. Look at the comparison. Basically, all of his images have this grain that is very natural, very nice. Almost looks like a matte painting or a matte print of a photograph. So let's just amp up the grain just a bit, just like this. Then amp up the size, and then just like this, values like this, ever so slightly. So I'm going to go with a 25 on the amount, the size of the 82, and roughness, just going to leave it at 50, guys. Maybe if you want to be a bit more prominent, you can amp up the roughness, but I don't recommend to do it too much. Otherwise, you lose a lot of sharpness from your image. So maybe to a 60, just about right, and it's looking very nice, guys. And finally, down in camera calibration, we're going to move the colors, or the basic colors of our image. So many editors will tell you not to move these colors because you're affecting the original colors in which this was shot. But this is a very stylized look, so I'm going to go ahead and move them to achieve this very nice look from Drtzed. So with a -9 on the hue, -8 on the saturation of the reds, we can alter them just a bit. Now I like to move the greens a lot, particularly in portraits, because we get a lot more out of the skin tone, so we move them up. So basically it makes all these reddish tones and the oranges on the skin pop up a lot more, and you end up with a lot more rich skin tones. So I'm just going to go to +16, not too much, guys, just like this. And then in the blue, well, the blue is basically how you achieve this teal and orange look that is very famous. If we move the hue all the way down, you can see that everything in the blues turns towards the teal color. We're not going to go to extreme. We're going to go with a -30 and a -12 on the saturation. Now basically this is how we do it. We can see with Y on our keyboard the before and after, and it's looking very much like a Drtzed portrait, guys. Now I'm going to save this preset. We're going to go over here to presets, create preset, and I'm going to name it Drtzed. Now remember, here we can check mark everything that we want the preset to be composed of. So in this case, I've unchecked white balancing, exposure, and contrast because that will depend on each image. Just going to create it, and then we're going to move into the rest of the images and see how they apply. So here we have a nice portrait of Danny in the shadows. So let's apply the preset. And here we can see how it's working out. It looks very nice, guys, the before and after. Beautiful portrait. Next up, we have this one of myself. A much more contrasty day. Just apply it and see how it performs. It's looking very good. Now I would go on ahead and edit this a bit. Just gonna go and crop it, maybe for Instagram with a 4:5. Center a bit of the subject just like this, and then I'm just gonna correct the horizon or the roof at least, like this one, just like that. Hit enter, and it's looking very nice, guys. We can see the before and after. Very good effect. Next up, another portrait of Danny over here. Let's apply the preset. It's looking very nice, guys. Maybe in this case, I would go to add a bit more contrast and a bit more exposure, just like this, to make it gloomy, to make it a lot more gloomy, just like that. And finally, we have this image of Danny in a sunset. So let's see how it applies on a golden hour, just like this one. Now it's looking very nice. I'm liking it a lot, but we're losing too much contrast. So in this case, just amp up the contrast just a bit, and the exposure, maybe reduce the highlights, and I'm quite happy with those results, guys. And that's going to be it for this tutorial, guys. Remember that the preset that we've just created, I've added it to the Edit Like preset pack, which is linked down below. And also, I've created a preset pack with 14 presets, heavily resembling the 70s and 80s retro vibe. So if you want to go check it out and support me in that manner, you can always do it. And if you did like the video, guys, can you please give it a like? It really makes a difference, and consider subscribing. Hit the notification bell to be notified when I upload the next video. Don't forget to smile. I'm Fuentes. Cheers to all of you, and see you in the next one.